You didn't see Shay?
Hi.
No, his name's up there. Just check.
Well, and it is when you get to this point of the circle, it is kind of weird. All right.
I count on you to man these doohickeys. Right?
Yeah, they usually do every other
What
one.
does that one do?
Okay, we'll get this special joint session of the Traverse City City Commission and Traverse City Planning Commission started. We did have a regular City Commission meeting at 5:15 where attendance was taken, and also we went through the formalities of the pledge and land acknowledgement and other things. So we will continue from there. I believe the Planning Commission has had a visual attendance, so we don't need to stop for that. So with that, I will get this meeting started. This is just a study session. No action will be taken today. These are really, pretty much all of these are conversations that we're just starting, but we wanted to start them together rather than on two separate tracks and come together later on and make sure we're starting on the same page instead of trying to come together later. So no action will be taken, and this is just for discussion purposes. So with that, we'll start with our first item on the agenda, which is the discussion of potential transition of year-round Operation Safe Harbor, but this is really just to look at the special land use process. Sean, I'm going to kick off the whole meeting and hand it over to you right now.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Before we get started, though, we've had a lot of new faces join the boards and commissions as well as city staff. So for the benefit of each other and the public, perhaps we can start by going around introducing ourselves and what board you are on and or what position you have at staff. So my name is Sean Winter. I am the planning director and the staff liaison to the Planning Commission.
Go to Jess.
Jess Heller, I'm on Planning Commission.
My Stanley, City Commission.
David Knapp, Planning Commission.
Mark Wilson, City Commission.
Madeline George, Student Liaison for the Planning Commission.
Jackie Anderson, City Commission and Planning Commission.
Jim Teller, City Appointed Staff Member to the Planning Commission.
Debbie Hershey, Chair of the Planning Commission.
Amy Shamrow, Mayor.
Shay O'Brien, Secretary of the Planning Commission.
Tim Werner, City Commission. Somebody.
Anna Deturi, Planning Commission.
Brian McGillivray, Planning Commission.
Mitchell Treadwell, City Commissioner and Planning Commissioner.
Heather Shaw, City Commission.
Thank you. And then behind me, we have a staff table, faces you'll typically see at a meeting, so we'll start.
Deputy City Clerk. Katie Miller, Planning.
All right, thank you very much. So the purpose of tonight is multifold. First of all, we are a certified redevelopment ready community through the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, which does require us to have at least one joint meeting per year. So we're checking that box with the meeting tonight. Other than that, it is just good practice to occasionally touch base as both bodies. Next thing the second thing we'll talk about, I guess first, would be the special land use permit process. This has come up as there have been discussions about a possible year-round emergency shelter. We're not going to be getting into the details of that topic specifically, but focusing on the SLUP process. We do not get those often, and they do involve both bodies, so we want to make sure everyone's aware of that. Next will be the Master Plan Mobility Action Plan, the review and approval process, which we're beginning to enter into, and then a discussion on short-term rental regulations. As the mayor pointed out, we will be making no decisions tonight. This is just for discussion purposes. Any questions before we begin? All right.
Take it away.
So we'll start with the SLUP process. So special land use is a type of approval for allowed uses. You may hear the term allowed by right or SLUP. So by right means that there's a set list of standards that if all of them are met, then the Planning Commission or staff has to approve it because it's allowed by right. A special land use process has a different process to follow throughout it, and it's actually the only decision that the Planning Commission can make that has a discretionary component to it. The standards that they have to review aren't as black and white. They're somewhat subjective. However, whatever decision the Planning Commission and the City Commission make, they do have to be supported by a finding of fact. Sometimes if a decision on a SLUP approval or denial gets challenged in court, oftentimes the judge doesn't review the decision, but how the decision was made, and that finding of fact is how you document the way that you arrived at that decision. So the SLUP process is prescribed in two places, one being the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act as well as in the Traverse City Code of Ordinances through the zoning ordinance. So these are required processes that we have to follow for these particular types of land uses. And as was mentioned at the City Commission last week, when it comes to SLUP uses, there are a set of general standards that apply to all of them that have to be reviewed, as well as use-specific standards for each individual use. So those would be the standards for any SLUP that the Planning Commission and the City Commission would have to review as part of their finding of fact. Any questions on that? All right. So what I want to do now is walk you through that SLUP process as is outlined in our zoning ordinance and reflected in the Zoning Enabling Act. So the first required step is a pre-application meeting. So we will not accept an application from a potential developer or anyone looking to do a project unless they've met with staff first. And we put this in the ordinance so that the planning department has the opportunity to meet with the applicant and go over the requirements, the timelines, the expectations, and things like that, so that they're just frankly aware of it. And that's one of the best practices we had to incorporate as part of our redevelopment ready community certification. So therefore, things are predictable and people can figure out ahead of time what is expected of them. So the next step is them submitting an application. So our bylaws that the Planning Commission updated last month require that any application be submitted at least 14 days prior to the meeting where it'll be introduced. Now, since this topic of this process has come up within the context of a discussion on the safe harbor year-round shelter, I want everyone to know that the deadline for them to have been on the March Planning Commission meeting was yesterday. We did not receive an application, so therefore they will not be introduced in March. Just want to make that clear to everyone. So once received, staff reviews the application. It typically gets distributed to the other department heads. We review the general and use specific standards. We look at the master plan for consistency, any other relative documents or policies that we have in place, and then staff creates a report that they're able to submit to the Planning Commission. From there, the third step is an introduction to the Planning Commission. Now, this has to happen at a regular business meeting. The Planning Commission regular business meetings are the first Tuesday of the month. Their study session is the third Tuesday of the month. The application is typically introduced by staff at those meetings. The applicant is on hand to provide an overview so that staff isn't in a position of having to speak for or against a particular project, but rather a more objective review. And then the Planning Commission sets a public hearing. So I just want to talk about public hearings real quick. So the law requires that public bodies have public comment at least once during a meeting. The most common structure is 2 public comment periods, one at the beginning, one at the end. So the purpose of a public hearing is to allow the public to speak on a specific item when it's discussed in the agenda prior to a decision. Now, we do that for every agenda item. So it kind of, in some respects, waters down the public hearing, but that's not a bad thing by any means. I just want to kind of clarify that. The other thing is public hearings do require notice. So we will have to run a paper or an ad in the paper or notice at least 15 days before the meeting where the public hearing will be held. And similarly, we have to mail letters notifying people of the public hearing within 300 feet of that property. So that is all property owners and occupants. But there is a note there that if a property is occupied by 4 or more units, then you just send it to the manager of the property. So if you're in a condo building, that notice may be posted in a common area and things like that, and you may not receive it directly in your mailbox. Typically, when we run the report to gather the addresses, we just grab them all and mail them to everyone. So for the public, please make sure you have an accurate address with the assessing office, because that's what we use to send out those notifications. Any questions on public hearings then at this point? Okay, so they'll set that public hearing due to the minimum 15-day period before the public hearing that the notices have to go out and the lead time to go to the paper. Typically, the public hearing will be held at the regular business meeting the following month. In between those 2 business meetings, the Planning Commission typically has a study session. It is not required that a SLUP application be discussed at that study session, but it does give the Planning Commission another opportunity to further discuss the topic with the applicant and really kind of get into any questions that they have. Or if at the introduction meeting they pose questions, the applicant can come back and provide answers prior to the public hearing. The next step will be the Planning Commission public hearing. So this is the opportunity for the public to comment on the proposed project at that point in the agenda, as I had mentioned. I just want to reiterate that the comments received at a public hearing are but one input that the Planning Commission and City Commission use to make their decision. And I bring that up because a a public hearing is not a referendum. We've heard that before at meetings before. People said, well, more people spoke against than for, so you can't approve it. And that's not a true requirement, so I just want people to be aware of that. After that, the Planning Commission will make a recommendation. So when it comes to SLUPs, the Planning Commission does not make the final decision. They're just a recommending body to the City Commission. So they will make their recommendation. It may occur at the same meeting as the public hearing, or if the Planning Commission wishes, they can bring it back and make a decision at a future meeting that may be the result of additional questions that came up or more information that was needed. Their recommendation to the Planning Commission has 3 options. They can approve it, they can recommend to approve with conditions, or recommend denial. But again, they must adopt a finding of fact to support their decision. So they need to document how they arrived at that recommendation. From there, it will go to the City Commission, where it will be introduced at, again, a regular business meeting. So the City Commission regular meetings are the 1st and 3rd Monday of the month, correct? Did I get that right? Thank you. Similarly, application will be introduced by staff. The applicant themselves can provide an overview. The City Commission will set the public hearing. It has to follow the same requirements, so it will be at least a month before that public hearing is held because of the notice requirements. In between those 2 meetings, when it's introduced, and then when you have the public hearing, you will have typically 1, maybe 2 and study sessions and 1 regular meeting. At any point, this SLUP could be added to an agenda for further discussion. So at the City Commission level, since they meet more often, there's much more opportunity to discuss it. They may find that they don't need that, and they can choose to move on. Again, not required, but available. So then the City Commission will hold their public hearing. Same kind of basic process and rules apply as with the Planning Commission. At the close of the public hearing, that's when they are able to take action. They don't have to take action that night either. They could move it to another meeting. They can approve with conditions, or deny. They're not beholden to the recommendation that they receive from the Planning Commission. It's just part of the process. But if they decide to approve or approve with conditions, then an order granting gets executed. So typically staff works with the city attorney to draft that up with the applicant, and it gets signed by, I believe, the clerk, the mayor, and the city manager? Close enough. I forgot. So that's the end of the SLUP process. Again, we don't have them very often. I would say typically a minimum of 3 months from the time that an application is received to when action can be taken. And that is in best case scenario because of all the public meetings that have to occur, the public hearings and notice requirements and things like that. So any questions on the SLUP process before we move on? I guess at this point, Mayor Shamrow, I'll hand it back to you if you guys have any further comments.
So right now, hold on just one moment. I'm just going to clarify for everybody. We're going to take some questions, potentially comments, if anybody has any right now about the SLUP process. I want to start this conversation out with the underlining reminder, we do not have a SLUP application from Safe Harbor right now. I'm going to say that because this was brought up under the context, you could ask some probing questions to how that process might look in conjunction with the process that we just went over. But we don't have a SLUP in front of us. No one can answer questions about what a potential SLUP would look like because we're not here to engage in conjecture. So I just wanted to make that clear to everybody that that's kind of where this conversation is going to be today. If a SLUP application comes in, we would have hearings and study sessions, et cetera, on that specifically. This is very high level today. So I would like anybody with questions or comments to please keep them at that level because we don't want to confuse the issue with something that doesn't exist right now. Go ahead, Mitch.
Yeah, and going off of that, and question for Director Winter, since we do not have an application that was received by the deadline to be on our March meeting, and as you said, it takes typically about 3 months, even if we did have a SLUP application come in, the soonest this could be dealt with, come to pass would be June or July.
I would agree with that.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Anna.
In an effort to remain very transparent, I did go through the conflict of interest process and evaluation with the city attorney. I was an employee at Safe Harbor 2.5 years ago for 2 months, and my partner is on the board of Safe Harbor. So I do not believe there's a conflict of interest, but I do want to be transparent. Also, the SLUP process is incredibly detailed, so it's very strict on what can and cannot be introduced. And since we're not even here on a SLUP yet. I just wanted to be very transparent.
Any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Jackie.
Process question. Do the steps remain basically the same regardless of whether you're talking about a brand-new SLUP versus an amended SLUP?
Good question.
Essentially, yes. There are two types of amendments, a minor amendment and a major amendment. In the context of going from a seasonal shelter to a year-round shelter, just for an example, that would be a major amendment potentially, which is the same exact process. It goes through it. In discussions that have occurred about this, I believe that if Safe Harbor was to submit an application, and it's the same application for a major amendment or a brand new SLUP, they may just go with a brand new SLUP because they've amended it a few times. So in order to make things clean, sometimes you're dealing with like multiple order grantings and things like that. Just start fresh, new vision. And I think that's the direction they may go in the event that they apply.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, but same exact process.
Any other questions on this item? Go ahead, Brian.
Even if they apply for a brand-new SLUP, it doesn't vacate their existing one, correct?
So I have spoken with the city attorney about that, and what we would probably do is when it would come time for the city commission to vote to potentially approve a new SLUP, we would have another document terminating the prior SLUP. The city commission did that recently with a SLUP that was issued maybe 20 years ago for a duplex, which is no longer required on State Street because they're allowed. So they had their SLUP terminated through action of the city commission.
But if... Wait, Brian's... Oh, yeah.
But just to be clear, if the new SLUP wasn't approved, the old SLUP would not be automatically vacated.
That is
Just
correct. And so just to add another point of information about that, SLUPs run with the land. So an emergency shelter is approved for that property. It's not approved specifically to Safe Harbor typically. I would have to look at the language of the order granting unless it gave some exclusivity to them. But typically it runs with the land and it doesn't expire. Yeah.
That was
your question.
my question.
All right. Thank you.
All right, any other questions? We have this option at study sessions, but I'm going to exercise it. We don't have to, but I'm going to exercise the option right here. If someone would like to make public comment at this time on the discussion of the SLUPs in the context of what we are talking about here again, so not supposition about something that may or may not come forward, but if you have questions you maybe would want us to answer today, we won't do a dialogue with you, but because this is kind of an intro, you can present questions and they can be answered after public comment, or you can ask, give general opinions about SLUPs if you feel very passionately about them. So if anybody would like to make public comment at this time, I would invite you to do so, and if so, Sarah's ready with the instructions.
We ask that you state your name
Well,
and
you don't have to do it, Sarah, because I don't think anybody's coming. Sorry, we preemptively did it. We got her excited about doing the but we'll wait and see if anybody is a taker on the next one. Oh, wait, do we have someone? Sorry. I apologize. Now you can do it, Sarah.
Thank you. We ask that you state your name and address, indicate if you are a city resident, non-city resident, and or city business owner. We have a 3-minute time allotment per speaker.
Thank you for bearing with us on that.
Thanks. I'm Emily Cashelle. I live at 715 Webster Street. I'm a Traverse City resident. You had said that the bylaws were amended recently. I would just be curious to learn more details about in what ways they were amended in detail. That's
Good.
all.
Thank you. Anybody else for public comment right now? Seeing none, I will close public comment. Sean, did you want to take a stab at that, or do you need to gather it up and come back with an answer?
Yeah, I mean, because the changes were pretty minimal. Some of it was rearranging information. So, like, there was a couple different places we talked about voting. We grouped that together. We kind of, like, made it read a little more cohesively. I think the most substantive change was that the commission moved their meeting start time from 7 p.m. to 6 p.m. And so if any other planning commissioners have additional information to share, please feel free.
The only addition was the one that we talked about with not requiring the chair, I believe, be on every committee, but opting into committees. I think that was the only other noteworthy change.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Well, thank you. That sounds like some good housekeeping stuff there. So.
Yeah, it's just an annual process we go through.
Great.
to review it.
Okay, well then, closing public comment, we don't have any motions on this item, so we will now move on. Again, this is Sean's show tonight, to our discussion of the Master Plan and Mobility Action Plan. And again, this is a high-level introduction today for all of us.
Yeah, so as I mentioned at the onset of this presentation, we are entering the formal review and approval process, which will go through both bodies. So we wanted to talk about that timeline and what that will look like and what the different roles are for each of them. So I'll be moving through that. For a little update, the Mobility Action Plan draft was completed in the fall. The leadership team actually was completed in draft form earlier in the summer. The leadership team for that plan met a few times, reviewing the drafts, providing feedback, and it was in October that they finally recommended sending it on to the Planning Commission. The master plan draft is wrapping up at this point. Staff does have a draft that we are providing feedback on for the consultant. Each of the chapters has gone through the leadership team for that planning process, so they have provided their feedback. Those edits have been incorporated. Most of what we as staff are providing right now are looking for consistency, structure of the document, things like that, less on content, because that was the role of the leadership team. The leadership team will meet at least one more time to make sure that their recommendations and their edits were incorporated as desired. And then both plans will begin the formal review process as one document. So as we've been saying from the beginning, we've structured this master plan to have an appendix so that sub-area and subtopic plans can be adopted by amending the master plan and putting them right into it. Therefore, we have one location where all our plans are, they all have the same weight, and we'd like to be consistent with that moving forward. And we may be discussing a process to what to do with some of these older plans. I mean, we have plans 20, 30 more years old that are sitting on the shelves that talk about paving over the Boardman River. At what point do we sunset some of these plans and focus on the new planning documents? They still exist. They're a repository of information. They're great to have around, but which ones are we actually following? So going through that process at this time, so staff, as I mentioned, has been reviewing the document. It's kind of set up as three parts. So the first part is really the roadmap, or what's sometimes referred to as the magazine. It's approximately 60 to 80 pages, and this is the prescriptive part of the plan. So if you wanted to read a plan and figure out what the vision was, what the goals are, what the action plan of the plan, this is what you would read. The next part of the plan is the supplemental part. So all the chapters on the different topics of housing, transportation, economic development. And this is the information that was used to create the roadmap or the recommendations in the plan. So again, a plan should serve as a repository of information on your community, and that's what this portion does. Most plans have the prescriptive part at the end, and so, you know, it's like you got to wade through hundreds of pages to get to what the plan is actually saying. We're putting it at the front. The third part then is going to be that appendix that will have survey results in it. It's going to have the community engagement report from October of '22, as well as any sub-area or subtopic plans. So moving on, again, the consultant team has already incorporated the edits from the leadership team. We're going through it. Those staff edits will be incorporated. We met with them last week. We're scheduled tentatively to meet with them again on Friday, and then we'll get an updated draft to go to the leadership team. So that's the next step. At that point, when we're ready to distribute it to the leadership team, we'll also be distributing it to the city departments as well, so that they can review and make sure that the information that was collected and presented is accurate. It's kind of challenging with the master plan because it's a moving target. You know, we've been working at this for 2 years, so some things that were written as an initial chapter, things have changed. So we have to kind of go back and update some of that information to reflect what has happened over the last 2 years. Then the master plan leadership team, they will be meeting March 20th for their final review. All of this is tentative. If the leadership team or any step throughout here needs more time, then this schedule will change. This is just what we've mapped out kind of in a best case scenario. The next step is it will go to the Planning Commission for formal review. So that will occur between March 28th and May 7th. Again, both the master plan and the mobility action plan will be reviewed during that time. We have a number of extra meetings that have been scheduled, knowing that this is going to take quite a bit of work on the Planning Commission's part. So those dates have been distributed to the Planning Commission. They're on this presentation. They were in the Gantt chart that was provided in the Planning Commission packet 2 weeks ago, I believe it was. And at that time, when we distribute it to the Planning Commission, we'll also send it to the City Commission so you can begin looking through it. I would just put the caveat that it is likely to change between the time you receive it and when the Planning Commission is done with their review. I don't anticipate a lot of huge substantive changes, but there may be some changes. However, it's a lot of content to go through, so the earlier we can get it to you to start reviewing, the better. After that, when the Planning Commission is done, they will make a motion to send it to the City Commission for their distribution and review. So the Planning Enabling Act requires that the legislative body, through resolution, release the plan for the mandatory 63-day review period. So no action can be taken during that time period, and again, it takes action by the legislative body to release it for that time. What we would be asking of the City Commission is that they go ahead and release it, and then during that 63-day period, or approximately 9 weeks, that's when we'll be reviewing the plan with the City Commission. So we can allow that clock to tick. We are required to notify all the neighboring jurisdictions, utilities, transit agencies. It gives them time to start reviewing it. We can't notify them until after the City Commission action. And I just want to note that by releasing it for the review period does not mean that the City Commission is endorsing the plan yet. It's just a required step in the process. So again, City Commission will review that, and then tentatively, once we're done with the review of the Planning Commission, City Commission caught them up to speed, we will be holding a public open house. So therefore, the City Commissioners will be informed so that they can attend and hear from the public as well if they so desire. And we are tentatively looking at sometime between June 17th and 28th, so sometime in that window there. We haven't carved out a date yet because we're going to have to book a location if we decide not to do it here, and we just kind of want to see how some of these other timelines play out. So at the end of the 63-day comment period, that's when it will come back to the Planning Commission. They are required to hold a public hearing. It cannot be held until that 63-day clock expires. So we're looking at around July 30th to August 7th, returning it to the Planning Commission, providing them the opportunity to take in and review any public input that was received at the open house or during that review period. The tentative date is August 7th for the required public hearing that will be held by the Planning Commission. And then the Planning Commission is required to adopt the plan to put it into effect. And the Planning Enabling Act does require that 2/3 of the Planning Commission vote in affirmative in order to adopt a plan. So that would be 6 of the 9 voting members of the Planning Commission. Once they're done, it will go to the City Commission. Now, the Planning Enabling Act does not require any additional action by the legislative body to adopt a plan. However, it does give them the ability through an ordinance to require that a plan come to the legislative body for approval. And the city has enacted that ordinance, so that is on the record. So once the Planning Commission is done and has adopted it, it will come to the City Commission for adoption. The City Commission is not required by the Planning Enabling Act to hold a public hearing. They may choose to if they so desire. But they will have to, through resolution, then adopt the plan as well. The Planning Enabling Act does not require a 2/3 affirmative vote, but just a simple majority from the legislative body. And then both those resolutions from the Planning Commission and the City Commission are required to either be in the front or back cover of the plan to show that it has been adopted. And that is it for the planning process. Again, it's going to be a lot of meetings, a lot of reading, a lot of discussing, a lot of conversing, but that is the process.
Excellent. And so just because this is the joint body here, all of us are going to have some, as was seen in the schedule, and I'm seeing some of this a little bit released to the public via our social media through the city. I know we have a really good communications person that does more with that. So as well as what you've seen here, we'll be getting out some of these timelines publicly through shareable items, other ways too. It's not just a presentation and it'll go away until suddenly you're seeing a hearing notice or something like that. We're keeping it high level for this discussion of the process and a little bit of the discussion of what that's going to look like, and then each body will have a chance to kind of tear it apart in both of their mutual spaces at their respective meetings that have been outlined here. So with that, some questions? I see some hands. Yes, Heather.
The front part of the document, you called it the prescriptive, 60 to 80 pages, you said. The back part are the appendices with the data, I guess. The middle part, what did you call the middle part of the document?
It's more the supplemental material.
Supplemental material. So how many pages is this? How many pages estimated?
Total right now, we're at about 560. But keep in mind, about 100 of those pages are just the survey free response quests, or, they're all there for transparency. There's a lot of maps in it, so not every page is actual, content to read necessarily. And then some things that are put in the appendix that make up that 560 pages include things like the community engagement report, which has already been created and distributed and things like that. We're just housing it in the back of the document.
So the master plan that I was given 6 years ago when I was on the planning commission was about 20 pages long. I never saw anything beyond those 20 pages. So this is a completely different animal.
Yeah, our master plan that we have in place right now is way more than 20 pages, especially when you take in all the planning elements. So there's the transportation element, the historic element, all that stuff that's in the appendix. That's all part of that plan right now.
And will the planning commission and the city commission be reading all of 540 pages?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I mean, again, the 100 free response questions, that's entertaining sometimes and informative, but you're not required to read that, but we wanted to make it available to everyone. So really probably the most important part is going to be that prescriptive roadmap at the beginning. That's the actual part of the document that guides policy. The rest is more like a reference document, if you will. If you want to read the data on housing and things like that, that's in that bulk section in the middle.
Go ahead, Mitch.
Yes. You had commented that although there is draft language available now, it may see some changes before it finally comes before the Planning Commission and or the City Commission. Could you describe the nature of those changes? Are we going to see the appendices change, or would there be perhaps tweaks to the more prescriptive elements?
At this point, I would say most of them are non-substantive. Like, for instance, throughout the document, in some places they refer to it as the Boardman River, in some places the Boardman-Ottaway River. So we're like noting things like that. I mean, that's just one example, but that's really the nature of the edits that staff is providing right now. I can't speak to what the leadership team will ask of the consultants through edits, but again, they have seen and read through.
And there could be any nature of comment that comes through from the public during the public comment period, but the extent to which any of that gets then incorporated into slight tweaks here and there.
Yeah, and that's going to be up to the individual bodies as part of their review when they take that information in and what they want to incorporate and reflect from that process.
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, this is, I guess, a comment and directed toward our city manager largely, and it's about the mobility action plan. So in 2023, with all the turmoil, there was a missed opportunity, I feel, with the reconstruction of the 8th Street at Cass intersection, because from my reading, that's part of the draft mobility action plan, is that intersection, and yet the intersection was rebuilt in a status quo approach. So a missed opportunity, but there was a lot of turmoil. But there's another opportunity with the rebuilding of Union and 8th Street coming up, and I believe that's also in the draft mobility action plan. So to actually do something that's 21st century with that intersection and not what I refer to as 20th century. So yes, it's a nice new smooth surface, but that's an expensive new smooth surface that will not now I'm referring to the Cass 8th Street, will not likely fit into the vision of the mobility action plan, and yet it very well could be 30 years before there's an opportunity to redo it. So we still have an opportunity for the Union and 8th Street intersection. And I know there's been a lot of discussion, at least at the city commission level, over the past year about silos and breaking down silos. So this is a great opportunity to break down silos. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Tim. Any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Jackie.
For my benefit, because I'm coming in midway through this, and also I think for the public, could you tell us who sits on the leadership team who will be doing so much of this review?
Yeah, so Mitch is on it, Maya's on it, Debbie's on it, David Hassing was on it. Our former student liaison was on it. It may very well be then Madeline to serve that role. We had the city engineer, the city manager, myself, the DDA, CFO. We had 3 residents as well that were on it. I believe Frank Tuturi, the DPS director, was on it. It's been a while since they met, and we have multiple leadership teams, so I'm doing the best I can to remember. But it is, I believe, on the website too for the master plan leadership, or for the master plan project, which is tcmasterplan.org.
Thank you for mentioning that. So is there an overarching leadership team that, sort of an umbrella group, or will each section be going back to each of the content-specific leadership teams? Help me understand who's going to be reviewing what.
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, so the mobility action plan component, that had a separate leadership team, and that process is done with them. So it's not going back to them. They've completed their work.
Housing, for instance, or tourism, or?
I guess I'm not fully understanding the question. Sorry.
Well, as I understood it, and when I explored the project website today, there are placeholders for the housing section of the plan, and the tourism section of the plan, and the community engagement section of the plan. And I'm trying to understand, is this one leadership team making the final adaptations on the entire content, or simply on sections that are aligned with pieces of the plan that they might have been involved in originating?
Well, the leadership team has been involved in the whole process.
thing.
The whole thing, yes.
Okay.
So they're not broken down at content-specific,
Okay.
meetings. They've looked at every chapter throughout the process. To your point, we have had focus groups multiple times with different groups on topics of housing, the sustainable tourism, transportation, and things like that. We held them over a number of days out at Hickory. We did them this last winter as well, virtually for the action plan.
Okay, great.
Yep.
And then I'm very interested in exploring the community engagement portion of the plan. Did you say that part of the plan is already compiled and available?
Yeah, that report was created after the big initial community engagement that we did in the summer and fall of 22. Yep. And so I don't have my computer on me. I think it is on the website for the project, the tcmasterplan.org. It may also be linked on the city's website. They have a project page for this as well. So I know it was distributed to our communications manager as part of the strategy for getting it out there.
Okay. If I could make a request that you just double check on that status of that one in particular, because I did not see a link.
It is on the site.
Is it?
Okay.
Excellent.
It's
Thank
in
you.
the community engagement section.
Okay, appreciate
It
it.
has like
Thank
its
you.
own tab.
Yep.
Great. Good. And then back to the community engagement piece. How you mentioned a lot of verbatims, 100 pages of verbatims. How are you approaching making sense of those? How are you summarizing and drawing meaning from them?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of it was just one component of the survey, but that is one thing that our consultants have done is they've gone through, they've looked for common themes that were mentioned, things that were brought up more and more, some things that are just outliers, some things that a master plan isn't even designed to touch. So those we can't really do much about. So there's been just a heavy bit of evaluation reading through all of those.
Okay, so the consultants have been responsible for that piece of it.
Yep,
Okay.
and we work with them, and throughout this process, we've had weekly meetings with them to discuss the creation of it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Jackie. Anyone else have a question or a comment? Go ahead, Tim.
It's another comment, this time about the master plan. And at one of the very early kickoff meetings in front of the City Commission, it was shared that there would not be a chapter on climate change because climate change would be overarching and incorporated throughout the document. So again, maybe this is for city manager, not sure, but consideration that is this an opportunity to bring in some outside expertise at some point in the editing process to kind of strengthen that thread that runs throughout. And I've only read some draft pieces, and it's been months, so it could be there already. But there's opportunity with what's going on at the state level with the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan. And then as well, the City Commission has its 2016 resolution on being carbon neutral by mid-century. So there are targets that could be viewed. I certainly wouldn't be capable of doing it, and that's why I say if somebody from the outside, though, with those in mind or some other things, and then could read through the document and make some suggestions, not to redo the whole thing, but change some words here or there, add a paragraph, whatever it might be, but to actually help us follow through on that commitment to climate change.
Yeah, so I will add to that. I would love to come back to this once the draft's been distributed so we can look at it and see, having read through it last week and this week, there are two overarching themes, one being the climate change, the other one being equity. So throughout the document, there's call-out boxes, green for the climate change, blue for equity, that make connections with the content of what's being presented in the chapter and how that relates to either of those two topics. But one thing we had a conversation early on in the process with was the green team about having them evaluate this. So I'd like to still be able to do that. There are some limitations to what a master plan is. You know, it's supposed to be very high level, and that's why we've created this space for additional plans. And one of which, when we hired Leslie, who unfortunately can't be here tonight, our sustainability coordinator / deputy planner, is to begin exploring either a climate resiliency plan or sustainability plan as our probably next sub-area plan or subtopic plan that we'll address, where we can actually get into it in a greater detail than what a master plan can. But yeah, I'd be happy once we distribute it to hear, like, is it hitting the mark? Do we need, you know, what more do we need, I guess, essentially. But
thank you.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. Anyone else? Good questions, everybody. Good beginning of this discussion. I'm looking forward to all the meetings we're going to have to go through all of this.
You say dull meetings?
All the meetings that we're going
Oh,
to
I
have.
said the
Sorry,
dull
no.
meetings.
You know, might not, maybe as much fun, maybe more fun as the 1,000 pages of stormwater I think we all had to study as a city commission for a meeting a couple years ago. But I enjoy footnotes as a history student with citations, so much appreciated. So with that, because we've set this precedent, if anyone does want to get up and make public comment about the master plan, maybe ask a clarifying question. Again, there's going to be a ton of meetings, so details we'll get into a lot of those. We'll make sure that the city and through the planning department, we're sharing a lot of those meetings very clearly for everybody to understand, more than just in big documents like that. We have the Bay Brief and a pretty engaged social media. So with that, we can open this up for some public comment if anybody would like to make any. Did you want to make some? Go.
That's for me, 630 Cottage Drive, Apartment 1B, Traverse City, Michigan. I want to make one comment, is that the documents, you know, can be 520 pages to 20 pages. You know, it can be two ways where you have so much documents that someone might say, well, that's too diluted. Or if you've got too less documents, somebody say, well, that's not transparent enough. So that's just my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Anyone else? All right, everybody, thank you. So with that, we'll move to our last item, and that's short-term rental regulations. Just wanted to tip this off because I know some people have emailed me ahead of this and everything. Really what we're looking at here is putting our heads together on regulations that already exist and potentially really looking at maybe making them eliminating the allowance of short-term rentals or vacation homes, or restricting more than they already are. I had some people concerned that this was bringing forward opening up more short-term rentals and vacation home rentals, and that is not the intention of this discussion, just to tee it off that way. But I'll hand it over to Sean to get kind of more into the details of what we'll be looking at.
Yeah, thank you. So in January, the Planning Commission, as it does at the beginning of each year, kind of reviews some goals, items that they want to try to achieve throughout the year. And one item that was presented by staff was additional regulations to short-term rentals. As was noted by the Planning Commission when they were going through the zoning reform, they recognize that that is but one lever that's affecting housing. And there are others, and they were committed to exploring them, recognizing that there is no panacea, no one change is going to help address this problem that we're dealing with. And we heard that from the public as well. The public brought up a lot of concerns about short-term rentals. So when presented to the staff the potential of introducing or modifying caps to short-term rentals, specifically vacation home rentals, that was something that the Planning Commission supported. However, it was brought up, I think, by Chief Tuller, not to put him on the spot, that he would like to possibly have a conversation with the City Commission first. So I'll go through some basic terms so we all know what we're talking about, a little bit of the history that predates me so others can backfill that, and then just kind of a high-level discussion at this time. So short-term rentals, that's an umbrella term for the occupancy of a residential unit for a period less than 30 days. So if someone's renting out a home on a monthly basis, that's legal. That's not a short-term rental. So there's no prohibition on that. Underneath that umbrella term, we have two categories of short-term rentals, tourist homes and vacation homes. So tourist homes are where an individual is renting out a room or rooms in their house. It has to be a single-family home. They have to live there, and they're supposed to be present, primarily present, while that room is being rented out. These are allowed in residential districts because, after all, they are a residential dwelling. We have two classifications of tourist homes, high intensity and low intensity. High intensity tourist homes, they can have more than 84 night stays a year. Low intensity is limited to 84 night stays or less a year. A night stay would be if two people stayed 2 nights, that's 4 night stays. So that's kind of the differentiation there. They do require for the high intensity a buffer between them. I don't have the ordinance in front of me, but it may be 1,000 feet at this point. And then the licensing does notify people, I think, within 300 feet that an application has been received. Vacation home rentals are probably what most people think of when they think of short-term rentals. You'll often hear them just referred to as Airbnb. Keep in mind that's a brand like Vaseline, Ziploc, Kleenex. So a vacation home rental is when you're renting out the whole home without the owner present. The owner does not have to live there or occupy the space. It is prohibited in all residential districts. And I will do my best to paraphrase from the Planning Commission. As far as I know, they have no interest in introducing them into the residential districts. We're looking specifically at the vacation home rentals in the non-residential districts. Both of these require a license that gets renewed annually through the city clerk's office. So for the history of it, the Planning Commission reviewed the short-term rental regulations, specifically as they're related to vacation home rentals, through 2019 and 2020. The City Commission had a recommendation sent to them. The City Commission, as I understand it, and please others correct me, were not very supportive of it at that time. Some of the restrictions that the Planning Commission had put forth, one of the arguments that I had heard was, well, in some of these districts, we allow lodging. So you have a building that's 100% a hotel, so why would we limit the number of short-term rentals? I think as time has played out, I think most people are seeing that there is a difference in a hotel which is owned by one entity and typically has staff present 24 hours a day, as opposed to, say, a condo building that may be owned by 40 different unit owners and or operated independently of one another. So there is a bit of a difference there, and we have heard plenty of people in our public comments note that for many of those units right now, they're available, but they're dark because they're not leasing them out. They're waiting until summer, and that's when they can make money on them. So we're permitting dwelling units, but they're not really being used for that purpose, rather just vacation home rentals. So the City Commission adopted a more softer approach to this. They did establish caps in certain districts as a % of the dwelling units in a building, and I'll be going over those with you. And so again, for vacation home rentals, which is what we're really speaking about, the districts where they're allowed with caps include the C1, the C2, the D2 districts, and the I districts. So those are the two lowest intensity commercial districts. The D2 district is along 8th Street where it was reconstructed, and then the I is for the industrial district. So here, the number of vacation rentals is limited to 25% of the units in a building. So if you have a 12-unit building, then 3 of them could be used for vacation home rentals. They do require a license, again, that has to be renewed annually. The other districts where we allow vacation home rentals but without any caps would be the C3 and the C4, D1 and D3. the Commons, the Hotel Resort District, and the Transportation District, which is occupied by the airport. So a little bit of a different there. But again, vacation home rentals prohibited in the residential districts, not trying to add them into the residential districts. Just want to keep reiterating that throughout. So those are where we have them currently allowed, and here is a map for reference. So here are all those districts where they're allowed. We didn't separate them, but again, C1, C2, D2, and I are the ones that limit it to 25%. Now, the D2 district, that limitation came after the Planning Commission's recommendation. It was part of the Planning Commission's effort to redo the zoning along that new stretch of 8th Street as a result of the Envision 8th Street plan. So they rezoned the north side between Boardman and Railroad from 2 blocks that were C2, 1 block that was C1, made that D2, which was the same as the south side, but modified the regulations within the district, which included a limitation down to 25%, which was supported by the City Commission because that is in fact in place today. So some considerations. Again, the purpose today, and I'll reiterate this at the end, we're not trying to solve the regulations. Really, the Planning Commission is looking for direction from the City Commission. Some things that could be considered, and we will find out which direction this goes once we create a committee to work on this, would be to implement additional vacation home rental caps in the unrestricted districts. That's a possible option. Another one would be to have the caps as a percentage of the dwelling units per building, or maybe it's a percentage of the dwelling units per district. That's another way to look at it instead of just buildings. It could be a percentage of the total dwelling units in the city, for that matter, or it could be a set number. Some communities have adopted that. We're only going to have 400 total licenses along with the other restrictions. One thing that could be considered is eliminating the low and high intensity classification of tourist home rentals, and I'm throwing that in there now because it's under that umbrella of the short-term rentals in general. We in our office have not had any complaints about nuisance issues between a low intensity or high intensity one, and frankly, we don't have a way to really enforce that. They're on their own supposed to keep a logbook, but I mean, anyone could make a logbook or forget to put out the logbook for that matter of the guests that are staying. So I understand the reason why it was incorporated the first time around, but it's one of those regulations that really we can't do much with. The other one would be to eliminate the room density limits for the hotel and resort districts. And this was presented to me from staff that's been here a lot longer than I. Many, many years ago, they went through and eliminated most density limits within the zoning ordinance. And it was intended to remove the density limit in the hotel resort district, but that didn't get put in. And so it was an oversight, but that was part of the conversation. So right now, the hotel district is the only district that has a density limit in the city, and that's 44 rooms per acre. So we have dealt with some lodging individuals that are trying to get real crafty in how they can overcome that. Again, it wasn't intended to ever stay in there, so I think I'll just throw it out now as part of the conversation. So a couple other considerations before we get into the conversation part is just be mindful that if you make a change to zoning to something that is currently allowed, then we will create nonconformities. If they're legal nonconformities, they can continue to exist. So it's not necessarily changing what's already permitted, but what do we want to continue permitting going into the future? There will need to be conversations with the city attorney because these uses have an intersection between the zoning ordinance regulations, and then we have a separate licensing police power regulation that both govern these uses. So where do those two meet, and what does that mean for changing the regulations into the future? Another thing that we would ask as staff of the bodies looking into this is our ability to, honestly effectively enforce any changes in the regulations. I gave the example of the low and high intensity tourist homes, as well as the administration of the licensing process, which is from the clerk's office, so I can't speak to that myself, but I know that it is quite a burden for them to manage as well. So just putting those out there at the onset to kind of have people thinking about them as we move forward. So again, we're not trying to come up with specific regulations tonight. That's not the purpose of this, just to have a high-level discussion. Again, does the City Commission support the Planning Commission exploring additional regulations without them being laid out? And please keep in mind that that support does not mean that you will approve something that gets brought to you in the future. It's just, is it worth the Planning Commission's time with everything else they have going on to dive into. They have expressed a desire to, so I think they're willing, but they want to use their time wisely. And are there any considerations the Planning Commission should be aware of at the onset? Are there any hard no's that they need to be aware of? Are there any lines that you don't want crossed, and so on and so forth? So
Yeah,
I'll
and
turn
just
that
a
back over.
quick clarification, well, kind of I want to underline, I guess, is the only place you mentioned increased density was really for in hotels, and that would be for actual hotels. So just to use an example, if someone wanted to build a hotel in the hotel district that was maybe more like the Pod in New York, which are micro units that can tend to be a little more affordable, that would be where we're talking about, not potential rentals by non-hotel entities, correct?
Correct.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that because density is a hot button word sometimes, so I wanted to make sure that we understand that's not going to anywhere else. So with that, I'll open up to everyone else for any questions or comments. Tim?
Yeah, just part of the background, and only my perspective, but the 25% for some of these districts, Mr. McGillivray was there, I believe, this was the mayor, so they can correct me, but the thought behind it, and may or may not have played out, is that by going with 25% as opposed to 0 was to maybe help developers still pencil out a development so that they might still be willing to build that development with 75% non-vacation home rentals and 25% to maybe help it pencil out. So there was intent. Whether that came to be, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. And there's at least one where that has come to be, and that would be Common Ground across the street. So they have a certain percentage that are used for short-term rental purposes, and that helps subsidize the lower income units that they have. And that's how I understood it was intended. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was our discussion
Okay.
at the time. I agree with Commissioner Warner. Go ahead, Mitch, you had your hand up.
Yes, you had mentioned that we can't, or any zoning change doesn't affect existing uses besides making them non-conforming uses. It's an entirely separate question of whether there would be appetite from either the Planning Commission or the City Commission or both to do so, but we don't normally have the city attorney at Planning Commission meetings. So one thing I am curious about, would there be any mechanism for the city to essentially buy back licenses that are already granted if we decided to do so?
I think there's a
Because,
mic over there, if
yeah.
we could pass it. Thank you.
I don't know about buying back. There's some interesting things that they're doing up towards Charlevoix that I've kind of been studying a little bit on that front. But that's going to be a question that comes up if the city commission wants to dip below what is licensed currently. There's different ways to deal with that, but I think we'll get into that once we know whether this is something that both commissions want to go forward and discuss in more detail.
Okay, because yeah, as Sean mentioned, there are permitted short-term rentals right now that are vacant this time of year. There are other ones that are renewing their license annually to be a short-term rental, but are renting out on a long-term basis, I guess, in the hopes that the market will shift and short-term will become more profitable.
We can only conjecture at this point. So any other questions? Or in this case, because there are so many questions before us, if anybody has comments or strong feelings on anything, go ahead, Heather.
Who is currently monitoring and enforcing what we have now as far as short-term rentals that are hidden away in our residential districts, or larger buildings that maybe don't have more than 25% in those districts? Who is monitoring that?
So it would be the planning department and the clerk's office both. So when someone comes to apply for a license, the clerk's office verifies with their planning and zoning administrator that it's allowed within what the zoning ordinance requires. So for instance, if there's a building that's already at 25%, then Dave in our office would say, no, they can't get a license. That's not with the zoning, or it's not consistent with what the zoning requires. As far as the enforcement, that's largely done through our office. We have a contract, we're in the second year with a company called Granicus. So we use them for the licensing, so people can apply for their license online. Then it integrates those licenses into the enforcement dashboard, so we know which ones are licensed and which ones aren't. And then it becomes a cat and mouse game, frankly. So they have analysts that take the various postings on VRBO, Airbnb, HomeAway, all of those, and then they get to town trying to locate them. Some of the short-term rental operators that are operating illegally in those districts are very crafty. But once they get identified, we get a record that starts running for all their activity. And we can see day after day, they take it down during the morning when staff is here, then they repost it at night. But it becomes a challenge of having that evidence so that we can enforce it. So there is sometimes a frustration that we deal with. Someone will call and say, my neighbor's doing a short-term rental. What are you going to do about it? Well, we need evidence beyond you just saying that. And so that's where Granicus comes in, because they have the photo evidence that locates that property and keeps track of all the stays that they've had posted at that location across all the different platforms. That gives us the information we need to start formal enforcement. Now, the key with enforcement is compliance. So the first thing you need to try to do is get them to comply. So if you write them a ticket before warning them and telling them to stop, then the magistrate's not going to enforce that ticket. And it gets really tricky. We had one that was clearly operating again and again, had numerous postings after probably 3 violations sent to them. A ticket was issued. The defendant, if we would call him that, asked for an informal hearing before the magistrate, and we had one letter in the ordinance citation incorrect, and she threw it all out. So no ticket was issued in anything. So we have to start the process over again. So it's challenging because when Granicus identifies a location, we can go in there. What they don't identify is whether they're renting for 30 days or not, because that's the threshold to make it a short-term rental. So you can post on Airbnb for 30 days or more. So it does take legwork where we have to go in and individually check, or sometimes try to book it and see whether it will in fact let us book for a period less than 30 days, because the people that have the postings can set that in. So then we have to note it in the database that even though it's been flagged on one of those sites and it doesn't have a license, it is legal because they're operating for 30 days or more. We've had other instances where we have found postings for particular homes. We send them a violation letter and they're completely dumbstruck by it. It's because they recently bought the house and the previous owner has the posting out there. And so now we're trying to track down the previous owner to have them remove their posting because they no longer live there. And we can go into the assessing records and verify, yep, you did in fact buy this house last month and stuff like that. So it's a lot of labor, frankly.
Well, how many tickets did you write last year, or?
I don't have any of that information with me right now. We can provide it, though.
More than 10?
I don't write the tickets myself, so I'll have to talk to the code enforcement officer.
Well, and just thinking about how can enforcement work better? Is there another program out there? Can you rely more on public input?
We're always willing to accept public input, but we can't enforce based on public input. We have to find evidence.
Somebody could go and
yeah, and typically when someone does inform us, our planning and zoning administrator will contact that person and be like, hey, just heard you were, just let you know that it's not allowed.
So where do the police get involved?
Really quick, Heather, though, I mean, we'll answer the police question, but right now we're just trying to figure out what we want to dig into. And I think as we have those conversations, that's going to be an opportunity for us to look at the companies we use, how we enforce. And so we can definitely finish with the police question for the overall, but I don't think we're going to get into a discussion of what better software we should be using right now or anything tonight. So,
well, I wasn't suggesting that. It's okay.
Okay.
But the police aren't really involved in this process unless there's a nuisance issue.
Okay, so that intersection between the police and the clerk
It's
and
called a
the
police power ordinance. That's a different type of ordinance. So zoning ordinances regulate land use. Police power ordinances typically regulate activities. So police power ordinances are things like sound, trash, grass height, or in this case, an ordinance spelling out the licensing requirement.
So if you get a call saying there's a short-term rental operating next to me, it's been operating all summer long, who goes to look there?
Well, typically we start by looking online and seeing what we have found there. It's hard just to go there and be like, you know, are you short-term renting this place? You know, they're pretty crafty about it. They're not going to say yes, or they'll tell people if someone comes, tell them you do live here and things like that. So, you know, we don't keep any record of long-term leases, so we don't know who's legally able to stay there or anything like that. It really comes down to finding the evidence of them posting online that they're doing it. Then we go ahead and notify them, and then all our actions get tracked through Granicus, so we can see, you know, we sent you a warning letter on January 11th. It was delivered January 22nd. And then since then, you've had 6 documented stays. So you were informed. We gave you the opportunity to be compliant. Now you're going to get a ticket. And so then we began writing those tickets. But again, we have to know about it, find it, warn them, give them the chance to be compliant, and then continue to monitor to make sure that they don't do it any further. So there's a lot of them out there, you know.
Really quick, Maya had her hand up earlier.
So when you're talking about tickets, when we're talking about penalties, how are those determined? Who has the power or authority to decide what the penalty is for someone who has been in violation of our ordinance?
So it is spelled out in the ordinance, and again, I'm going to go from memory here as best I can. I think it's up to $500 a day. It is a civil infraction, which I believe is the max that you can charge for that. Each and every day that the violation occurs is another violation.
And if we wanted to increase the monetary penalty, who has the authority to do that?
So if it's in the zoning ordinance, it would have to go through the zoning ordinance amendment process, which ultimately that decision is made by the city commission. Police power ordinances, those can just be changed by the city commission. There will need to be consultation with the city attorney about what that maximum threshold is. But I will add, just because we have it in there, that doesn't mean what the magistrate's going to levy.
Sure.
The magistrate has discretion to say, you know what, yep, you did it for 10 days at $500 a day. Well, here's a $500 fine, and that's what you pay. The other thing, and not that the city is trying to be profitable off enforcement, because it's not, but with all of those resources invested, including the contract with Granicus, when we write a ticket, we get a third of it. So, I mean, I remember from my time at my previous township I worked at, I mean, to go through and document that and write all the reports for the magistrate and do all these letters, you're looking at 20 hours of staff time that resulted in a $100 ticket and a $33 check to the municipality to pay for all those efforts. Again, we don't do it to make money, but again, enforcement, just so everyone knows, it is a money-losing process. So.
Jackie, you had your hand up?
I wanted to publicly say thank you to the planning department who created, in time for the Planning Commission's January meeting, a really helpful dashboard that gives real-time data and locations for vacation home rental licenses, tourist home licenses, and ADUs across the city. And I may or may not have been successful in sharing that link to the dashboards with
It was
with
emailed
folks
out,
on
yes.
You found it. If that might be valuable information for the public, if they could contact your department for access to that, or?
Yeah, I appreciate that, but credit is due to Jerry Swanson, our GIS coordinator. He made that. I just have the link to it. So he would be the one to discuss, you know, making whether it is shareable at this point. I mean, obviously you all received the link so you can view it, but yeah, we'll try to remember to bring that up with him.
And a suggestion, because I think we're struggling to decide or see evidence of whether there's a relationship between long-term housing availability and short-term rentals within our city. And I wondered if it might be possible to use the GIS system to create some comparable information about the results of the zoning changes that were made last year. You know, 2 homes on 1 lot, the duplexes by right, lifting the ADU cap, whether having that portion of the information might help us to see whether there are any, certainly not cause and effect, but maybe some correlations that could help us better anticipate what would happen if we push this button or push that button in decision making. So I'd love to hear some follow up on that, please.
Yep, and we are in our office tracking that. I've asked Dave, who issues those permits, to keep track of any ones that were permitted under what has been enacted through the zoning reform.
Great.
A lot of questions. I know there was concern about this, but almost every call we get are from local property owners. They're not real estate investment trusts that we're going to come raining in on the city. It's been people that have been like, hey, I got this rental home. Can I build a second home, or can I convert this into a duplex? But when I talked to him about it 2 weeks ago, he had not issued any permits yet. A lot of conversations, but no permits issued. That's not surprising, because once something's enacted, you got to get an architect or an engineer involved, find the financing. And just in general, across the board, our permitting is down. And I could speculate between the high interest rates, the high cost of construction. It's challenging to get things built right now.
And that was another thing I noted in terms of just your annual department reports have shown some real interesting trends that may or may not be related, but the pretty sharp decline in dwelling unit permits over the last from 2021 to 2023, and a corresponding increase in the vacation home licensing issued. Whether those are related or not, I think would be worthy of some more exploration. And again, if we can make as much of this transparent and available to our citizens, I would be very much in favor of that.
Yeah, and I'll just point out that, like the riparian buffer ordinance that is getting underway now, it is intended, it was discussed at the Planning Commission, to create a committee that will have at least 3 planning commissioners on it, as well as citizens and other stakeholders in this space, to work through drafting any potential regulations. Those meetings will all be public. All that information will be shared with them and therefore the public as well. So yeah, that will be forthcoming. It is kind of interesting you're talking about correlations. We have heard anecdotally from probably 3 different local realtors that the short-term rental housing market is taking a big dip right now. I think some of that is life was good during COVID up here for short-term rentals, and people are getting back to going back to older pre-COVID, if you will, travel accommodations, less concerned about staying in hotels as they were maybe 3 years ago and things like that. One person I know who's a realtor, she was asked by her brokerage to list the brokerage's short-term rental because it doesn't make money. They can't get the bookings to cover the mortgage and the non-PRE taxes and things like that. So
it would be wonderful to get beyond the anecdotal into some publishable data.
We will do our best.
Thank you.
Okay, and Anna, you had your hand up?
Wow. Mayor, I am so shocked that you remembered that.
I write things down. I don't remember anything.
I had already zoned out. The reason this came up was because some of us on the Planning Commission remembered from the first round when we had talked about this. I believe Brian was on the Planning Commission with us at that point. It's been so long. It was my first year. And then a very common thread that we heard about last summer during community engagement for the master plan and the previous summer was short-term rentals. Every single public engagement event I was at, whether it was at the high school talking to kids or in the basement of the Park Place, short-term rentals came up in tandem with the housing crisis. And we cannot separate those entirely. They're all correlated, they're all related. We don't know the depth of which they're tied to each other. But we cannot continue to see the results of our lack of long-term housing and do nothing on other fronts and just hope that the business dries up. I don't want, I will feel guilty if I don't try my best every avenue possible to expand housing opportunities in a tiny town that outprices people. So I really think that the committee is the way to go. I think we can do it collaboratively between the city and planning. I will do a tiny little brag. I think it was my idea at the meeting, like we should have a committee. And I want residents on the committee. I think it would be really helpful. I want staff on the committee, maybe the code enforcement officer. I doubt he has time, but maybe he would offer a meeting quarterly to talk about it, or at least give his experiences. I do think it would be really helpful to go through a committee process on this one, because the last time around we didn't, and we were just kind of already behind a little bit on the short-term rental situation and kind of reacting. And I'd like to not react. I'd like to be proactive this time around. And if that means that we go through the process of a committee, even though we have a very busy calendar, I think it's worth it.
Great. And I think Anna brought it to the point that I was going to bring it to, that, excuse me, that there's a lot of process out there. There's a lot that I've been on the commission for 8 years, but I've never sat on planning that I don't know all the details of, because I see it when it comes to us at the top. So I think this has been a good discussion to get into a little bit more of the nuance. But, you know, bringing it back to the kind of the bigger question of the night tonight, and I'm still open to everybody else, but I would love to see us examine everything that was brought up here. I think they're all possible solutions to the housing crisis that we have here, the housing crisis we have in America. No one piece, we've talked about this for years, and it can be used for us and against us. No one piece is going to solve any of this, but a lot of little pieces can help to make a change and make a dent. And so I include in that just to clarify, like obviously all the reexamination, I agree with what Commissioner Warner said. Our thoughts on the 25% were maybe this can make some developments happen. I'm glad to hear it happened with one. If looking at the different districts that's allowed in, though, means that recommendation might be brought back that would be eliminated in some, I personally, and I think I'd be curious to hear from others, would be okay at least entertaining that. I also agree with the tourist home licensing restrictions. We talked at the time it was going to be kind of burdensome, and I think that's proven to be true. And again, looking at the cost, we talked about interest rates, we talked about the cost of housing. Giving people the option to stay in their home by renting out a room or two. Look, there's a few traditional, what people would think of as B&Bs in this town, but a lot of these are just people renting out an extra room because their kids went away to college and they're getting some money to help with that. Or, they're a little older and live on their own, or just a couple and want some company sometimes. So I think that that's something I would also include. We talk a lot about the individual short-term units that are by themselves, but I think exploring how in this case we're a tourist home where the person lives in the house could actually be a bit of a benefit to helping people in our area as well, my 2 cents. The only other thing I would put to that I don't think we had in the past, but maybe could be part of the discussion, is we have an application process that helps you all get down the road of looking at online listings and such. Perhaps one of the questions on the application, though, could be, do you have a condo association? I know sometimes condo associations do ban short-term rentals, but because technically they're not 25% rentals in the district, that might not pop up. And so that could be an easy, quick call to the condo association president of, hey, are they even allowed here? Because I think that's where some of these non-compliant things will happen, and the person might have been sold it not knowing, or they're working around even their neighbors on it. So, and the only other thing that I'd throw out there right now is that when we start with these discussions, they're very important. If people think that their neighbors are in on it, or are maybe violating it, do what Sean suggested, come to them, let them investigate. We'll also share, though, and again, a lot of this is anecdotal, that I also do know people who had long-term car problems and had to go through 2 or 3 rentals and got called for doing short-term rentals because we keep seeing these different license plates in your driveway. So I would also encourage people, as we have these conversations, to also talk to your neighbors and engage. And it's not possible for everything. I'm not asking people to go into situations where they don't feel comfortable, but I think sometimes when we start these conversations up over the last few years, I've noticed there can be kind of a heightened distrust of their neighbors sometimes, or a little suspicion. So I'd encourage people to also be neighborly as we're having these conversations, and we're all doing our best to get to the bottom of this and figure out how to make it work. So, but that's my 2 cents. Sorry, I went off a little longer than I intended to. So, others for questions or comments, please.
I just want to ask, around the table, do we have an interest in pursuing this? I mean, this is the question before us right now, and I'm all for putting a committee together. I think it's great, but we really want to make sure there is an interest in pursuing this.
Should we?
Are we here? Yes?
Great.
Awesome.
Any other comments or questions on this item? All right, seeing none, thank you, everyone. Because of the structure of this meeting, we could have a comment just on this, but we also have general public comment coming up after. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is open up general public comment. If you want to comment on this in particular, you can make it part of it. Or if you just want to get up and do any kind of public comment about a sidewalk in front of your house or how your day is, you're welcome to come up and give that as well. So please feel free to come to the podium if you have any comments both on this item or anything in general.
Hi, good evening. I'm Jessica Hamilton, 221 Boardman, here in Traverse City. My public comment is related to the SLUP part of the agenda, but I think zooming out a little bit. Through a FOIA application, I was going through some of the documentation related to the planning around the operationalizing Safe Harbor during a summer shelter, and I came across a scope of work between the city, the Northwest Coalition to End Homelessness, and Grand Traverse County that appears to have been signed sometime between September and October 12th. And a lot of this scope of work has a lot of deliverables that are related to the operational pro forma that I'm curious to know. And I'm curious to know why it hasn't, at least from my interactions with this process in the MOU, why that we haven't heard more about these draft pro formas that could impact the operational facets that will impact how Safe Harbor is in fact operating and who the operator is. That's one of the pieces that I thought was interesting in this scope of work, and that by phase 2, which if it's according to the estimated schedule, would have been completed by January of 24. I don't know if that's the case, but I'm just curious to know if that then impacts and maybe has something to do with why Safe Harbor hasn't put forth their application for the SLUP, in that those operating procedures just haven't been, or operating partners haven't been established. So I know you can't answer my questions. I know that this isn't a dialogue. I'm just raising them and would appreciate perhaps a little bit more discussion or information provided to the public as it relates to this scope of work, because it seems that there has been a lot of actual planning, if it's been going, and with the corresponding emails in related to the scope of work and how the city, county, and the coalition are working together to put this plan with an open date of April 2024. We now know with that application that isn't possible. But I guess my final request, would be to the city and planning commission is that we pause on this until all stakeholders are brought to the table and have a really in-depth discussion beyond public comment because we know that's not a referendum, on the impact that what's been happening in accordance to the scope of work, if this estimated schedule has been followed, that there should be some more public discussion or public deliberation that maybe hasn't been part of this process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Justin Reed, 630 Cottage Drive, Permit 1B. I guess my question is, has Heather Shaw or any city commissioner talked to any of the townships about the homeless issue? Just wondering if they're going to chip in or anything like that. That's just my question, so thank you.
At the end, Heather, I'll give you a chance.
Hi, I'm Joel Jolene. I live east of the Boardman Lake. Yeah, just wanted to reiterate, there were some points made about how like the short-term rentals will affect other areas in rentals in the city. And I just want to reiterate that I think it's really important to be proactive when adjusting those things and how it will affect the people that actually like live here full time, and to not forget about us. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Megan Wick, and I live at 436 Washington Street, and I have 3 small children, 13, 9, and 5. Our neighborhood has history with the SLUP process, and the language that was used when Safe Harbor was first put into 517 Wellington, language such as that they would have a maximum length of stay, they'd have a crime prevention plan and a community outreach plan. The application also said that it would not require additional requirements at public cost, and it said that they would have an ongoing housing assistance program on site. I think we know how that all has played out. And the Boardman neighborhood has a constant flow of pedestrian traffic that loiters in alleys, harasses children, litters alcohol bottles, cigarettes, hypodermic needles from drug use, and human waste, urine and feces throughout our neighborhood. This is in the winter months, and now that the city is considering expanding this very location, I just want you to really be intentional about how this plays out in reality with the words on the paper for the SLUP process. The Goodwill Inn has criteria for screening who can stay there. Safe Harbor does not. I understand the need for a no-barrier shelter, but it's time for the city to acknowledge that a no-barrier shelter that has individuals battling substance abuse and severe mental illness does not belong in the middle of a family neighborhood. And I want you to picture a neighborhood full of children, not at school, but home each day for the summer break. Picture the community programs that draw more children into the downtown Boardman Lake area, such as Traverse Area Community Sailing, Norte, Cherry Festival activities, and then think of just the handful of incidents that I'm going to highlight here that have taken place in the winter months. But an individual stabbed someone at Safe Harbor. The police chased him into our neighborhood. They were found under my children's trampoline in our backyard. My neighbor Justin Jorkaski, walking with his daughters, his youngest picked up something off the ground and asked, what is this, Dad? It was a used hypodermic needle. My neighbor Sarah Cashel, who had to call the police because someone was masturbating in the alley behind her house. And just a couple of weeks ago, someone who was suspended from the library caused a disturbance, required multiple police officers, and the police were actually attacked by this individual. So no barrier shelter does not belong in the middle of a family neighborhood, and I think we need to work together as a community to find a better location and a better solution. And we've identified a property that has the same square footage as the existing Safe Harbor, has multiple kitchens and bathrooms, comes with 10 acres for room to grow and build, and it's not in the middle of a family neighborhood. According to the emails that we did FOIA on the subject, you have funders lined up to help convert 517 Wellington into a year-round shelter. Let's use that funding towards a better location for a no-barrier shelter. I know of other parties that are also willing to put dollars towards this effort. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Megan. Any other public comment?
Hi, I'm Lynn Swan, Dr. Lynn Swan, and I've been working with those experiencing homelessness now for over 7 years and helped start TC Street Medicine. So I'm aware of many difficulties, but it is a profoundly human and moral endeavor to try to alleviate human suffering. And 93% of the people that we serve have ties to our area. So I've gotten to know many of the people well over these years, and so much have aged over the pandemic years. It's been a really difficult time. I'm just here to advocate for a year-around shelter while we await the completion of multiple supportive housing endeavors that are so close. We're within years of some of these. This will provide a long-term solution to homelessness, not just emergency Band-Aids. And they need to access services by being in a location where they can do that. It's been a brutal few years, and our people have aged significantly with many early deaths. The root causes of homelessness always involves trauma and significant trauma. And when basic needs are not met, it's difficult to think of next steps to get out of the situation. So I understand that there can be a lot of concerns about the people that we serve, but there is a healing power and interaction that we need to contribute to their healing. So as people are housed and basic needs are met, especially safety, there's a chance to grow to new levels to end with an end goal of becoming a member of society again. And I noticed that during the pandemic, doing a lot of testing at the shelters, and you're waiting 15 minutes to get the result from COVID, and you hear the stories, and you've got masks on. It's not like you can communicate very easily. But over those years, a coalition was formed, and I got to see a lot of these folks. And relationship is critically important and respect is powerful. So the solution is housing, and we've got that in view. We've had a number of long-term people experiencing homelessness, and they say they don't have to sleep with one eye open. They can start thinking about other needs that they have and welcoming back into the community. So we all need relationship to change, and people change or do better when they are valued. So it's all about community and relationship, and I am hoping that we can come to some agreement about how to handle, what they are going through and what we are going through. So there is a way, I know there's a way, but it comes through relationship, and that is a powerful solution to some of the problems that we're experiencing.
Thank you, Dr. Swan. Thanks. Okay, any other public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back. I know Commissioner Shaw looked really quickly. Did you, okay, you're good? Okay, Commissioner Shaw was called out because she is our representative on the Township Association. She is not single-handedly responsible for bringing the townships together, though, so thank you.
I mentioned it to them.
Yes, I appreciate your efforts on our part there, though. Anna, did you have a last comment?
Yeah, I do, actually. One public comment did remark on the SLUP and the requirements that are in place of safe harbor within that SLUP. And if a violation were to have taken place, we would have heard about it, correct? They have to adhere to the policies to the requirements of the SLUP.
Yeah, I'd say that was correct.
Thank you. I just wanted to make that very clear because we've not heard any complaints in the years that Safe Harbor's been operating, and that they are required to adhere to those stringent policies in the SLUP.
Correct.
Was there any other final comment from commissioners from either board in general? We already closed public comment, I'm sorry. But you know what, since this is a little bit of a different format, you can go ahead and take your 3 minutes right now.
I guess the short-term rental as well.
Yes, please go ahead.
But I guess with regard to the SLUP, like who's actually enforcing that? I'm sorry, BJ Brick. I live in the Boardman neighborhood, 205 Wellington. With regard to the SLUP, who's actually inspecting and raising complaints? I think that for me, I just assumed it was sort of self-monitoring, but I don't know who does that. And maybe that's like an ignorant question, but maybe there wasn't complaints because people weren't looking at it overly closely. It seems like it would be good to know, and we're good to know who and what is happening and how it's occurring, and I guess that's part of it. It sort of seems like it hasn't been happening, but maybe there hasn't been complaints, but I'm not a witness to it. Regarding the vacation rental aspect, I think one of the things to consider is, first off, I'm very appreciative that there is restrictions in the residential neighborhoods. I've seen a hollowing out of neighborhoods that had no restrictions. I'm a realtor in town, and so I think that was a really smart move for keeping a robust community. I think one thing to look into is just the supply and demand that's occurred. The projects did pencil with Airbnb for years, and they've built hundreds of units with beds in them that are not cash flowing, and so people are converting those into rentals. We're seeing it in droves currently. So that's just worth considering that, like, of the hundreds of beds that were created, I don't know what percentage yet, but many short-term rentals that did not list in the summer, or listed only in the summer for short-term rental and then left them vacant in the winter, hoping for the occasional weekend booking. Those are now converted to long-term in winter, and most likely they'll be continuing that in the summer. It's just a supply and demand thing. Nobody's making money on short-term rentals right now. So that'd be pretty interesting to see how many hundreds of rooms are converted into long-term. I appreciate that. I didn't fully follow what the SLUP conversation was. It was a little bit confusing because I'm pretty new to that process, but from my understanding, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the application that didn't come in means that, like, if it comes in next month, then the potential for the summer shelter would be in July or June?
I'll answer after. Go ahead. You continue.
So just, again, my fear is just rushing into it. I think that all of us in the Boardman neighborhood that I've spoken to, not everybody obviously, but like the reality is this is a caring community. There's plenty of people that are fully on board with a low barrier entry homeless shelter. Just it's the location, it's the concentration that is the biggest concern.
Time.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, that's a much gentler buzzer than we usually have. So, sorry. Okay, so this is we're going to time out here because of the confusion and the different format here. This is the absolute last call for public comment on any item. So if anybody would like to public comment, right now. And please line up if you want to speak after. When it trickles in, we can't always see and people delay getting up, so please.
Kara Galvin, 439 Webster Street. Megan did such a good job and did so many of my points that I didn't want to come up here and just repeat the same thing that you probably have heard a lot. But I just wanted, once I heard the comment, I just wanted to push back on the SLUP and it actually be like following everything it needs to be. One of the things it says is that we will not create excessive additional requirements at public cost for public facilities and services. I don't get how we can say that that's true. One of the things that when they did the amendment, one of the things that in multiple areas was Safe Harbor does not create additional costs for city emergency operations, and in fact it is credibly believed to reduce the cost of city operations and to enhance the effectiveness of law enforcement. We, in the slides...
hold on just one.
Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Mitch.
In the slides that were presented, I think, last meeting, the library itself noted that they would need an additional 40 to 45K funding for security purposes. That's on top of, and I don't think I was at the meeting, I heard as close as 6 figures of what they're paying now, or they're paying a significant amount of money now for that security at the front. When I moved here, that was not here. The reason it is here is because of people who are using it incorrectly during the day. Resources are not going to the library because of families not wanting to be there. Besides the point is that how can we say that that we're following the SLUP if one service alone is asking for an additional $45K for security purposes just to keep Safe Harbor open? So I would say that it is not clear that they are following the SLUP in the way it was intended. Thank you.
Thank you. Since I did ask everybody to line up if you had any more comment, that is the end of public comment officially tonight. I thank you all for bearing with us in this joint study session, which a study session doesn't always have public comment, but we wanted to allow people to comment on things as they could. Just some clarifying points, though, really quickly, that Safe Harbor has not applied for a SLUP. There is no SLUP to be discussed right now, so that is, I know people were saying if they do this then. If that process starts, that will be a whole other set of meetings like was outlined. They will not, it doesn't get presented at one meeting and voted on by the City Commission at another. It goes through an extensive process at planning and then comes to the City Commission. I would also just point out, just because of the last, because we are trying to pull at threads to make sure people, this is a bigger conversation. All of these are huge conversations. There isn't a single answer, but the library is not a city budget item, and so that is not a city expense. It sounds like we're splitting hairs, but these are where, when we're enforcing SLUPs, that does make a difference, and there's some other things. That doesn't mean we're not taking into consideration comments from our neighbors like the library or public comment or anything else, but when we get down to enforcement of things, we have to enforce based on what is outlined. And so I just wanted to clarify that. But there is no slip in front of us right now to process. The whole point was to just talk over the process of a SLUP while we had everybody together. So I just wanted to clarify those points because the public comment was general and everybody was right to make the public comments that they did. But I just wanted to clarify because we also talked about SLUPs, that there is not a SLUP for Safe Harbor at this point. So with that, unless there's anything else from our gathered assembly here, I appreciate you all for getting a lot of great discussion entered here, and we're going to have a lot of meetings coming up in all of these bodies. We hope to see many of you there as well. So with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.